In previous videos, we looked at conditionals and loop structures or repetition structures that both used Boolean expressions to determine some course of action. And in those examples, we primarily compared numeric data. But oftentimes we want to work with alpha data or string, we call string data. And we can use the same Boolean operators in comparing strings, but you need to be aware of a couple issues. So here I have a string called XYZ. It's a variable, string variable, contains the word dog. And then I have another string variable called ABC, which also contains the word dog, but notice the difference. One is a capital D, one's a lowercase d. And then I have an if structure. I'm going to compare XYZ to ABC. If that is equivalent, if they are the same, I have a feedback underscore txt text field, and I'm going to place in that text, it's a match. Otherwise, I'm going to set the text of that text field to these are not equal. Now, if I were to execute this, what I would get is these are not equal. Dog does not equal dog. And here is why. And when I press a capital D on the keyboard, what is saved or sent to my computer and then saved in memory is a binary sequence of 01000100. That's equivalent to a decimal 68. A lowercase d, on the other hand, is equivalent to a decimal 100, and you see the binary signal that is sent there. When I'm comparing dog to dog, it's looking at the numeric value of the letters and not the alpha characters themselves. And so 68 is less than 100. And those are not a match. Now, if you don't remember how to work with binary numbers or hexadecimal numbers, you may want to go back and look at the video from the first Flash course where I discuss color and how color is comprised of a range of values of 8 bits and 24 bits and working with binary and hexadecimal numbers. And here is the link to get to that video. Well, if I want to do a comparison that is not case sensitive, I can use a string method called toUpperCase. And what I would do is insert two lines here. One would take the value of XYZ and convert it to all uppercase. And I simply use the .toUpperCase method. I know it's a method because of the parentheses. XYZ at that point would equal an uppercase DOG. I could do the same thing with ABC, converting it to uppercase, and ABC is going to equal an uppercase DOG. And now when I compare XYZ to ABC, I will get it's a match in my feedback text box. Because I can compare the first two letters that are the same, compare the next two letters that are the same, compare the next two letters that are the same. If I, by chance, if I had a space after one of these, say up here I had a space, they would not be a match. That space would cause it to have a greater value. In the same way, I could also use toLowerCase. And the toLowerCase method would convert XYZ and ABC to both lowercase letters. So I have a lowercase DOG and a lowercase DOG. And now those would be compared and would be equivalent as well. Whether I use toUpperCase or toLowerCase, it really doesn't matter as long as I'm consistent and I'm not converting one to uppercase and one to lowercase, in which case they would never match. Rather than changing the values of XYZ and ABC, a better way to do that may be to change them here in the conditional. So I'm going to convert XYZ to a lowercase and compare it to ABC to lowercase. And once again, I would get it's a match. Well, let's take a look at this in use. So I have a application here with a input text field called string1_txt, another one called string2_txt, a button called equal_btn, and my feedback_txt text. If we look at the code for our button, it's basically what I showed before, with the exception I added a nested if structure that will say which one is lower or higher. So if they're not equal, I'm going to also compare and see if one is lower, or if the first one is lower than the second. If it is, I'm going to concatenate to the text a new line character whatever the value was in string 1, and then a literal string of less than, and then the value that was in string 2. If that's not the case, then I can assume that string 1 is greater than, and I'll concatenate a new line character, the value that was in string 1, a literal string of greater than, and the value that was in string 2. Let's go ahead and test this and see how it works. So we've already seen that dog is less than dog if I have an uppercase D and a lowercase d. Let's test it. I'm told they are not equal, and dog is lower than dog with a lowercase d. Let's compare this to dog and cat. Capital D is an ASCII 68, and a capital C is an ASCII 67. So 67 is less than 68, and dog is greater than cat. Now if I make these the same, we'll see that they are a match. Well, let's look at how we might make these case insensitive. I have the same application here, but I've added a movie clip that I created called disregard case. It has a little checkbox. Let's take a look at this movie clip. I'm going to double click on it. It consists of 2 frames. So here's my first frame, a checkbox, and this box is actually a button, and the words disregard case. And if I click on this button, I have some code that has it go to the second frame of this movie clip, and there's the second frame. I have a little check mark in the box, and this now is also a button that if I click goes back to the first frame. Each of those is setting a Boolean variable called isChecked, and that is a variable of my movie clip. So on the first one, isChecked is false. If I go to the second frame, isChecked becomes true. On the second frame, if I click the button, it will go back to frame 1, so it's now unchecked, and isChecked becomes false. And all I need to do is check to see what the value is of isChecked for this movie clip. Just to demonstrate that, let me go back into my actions, and I'm going to add a line of code here. By the way, my movie clip is named disregard_MC. So we go back to my actions, and I'm just going to add a trace statement here that says disregard_MC dot isChecked. That was my variable of that movie clip. It's a Boolean variable. I'm going to convert it to a string. And let me test this. So if I click on equal, I now get in the output the word false, and that was that trace statement checking to see what the value is of isChecked. If I check this and click equal again, I'm now getting true. And go back to false, and it's false. So now I can use that value in my code to determine whether to make this sensitive or insensitive as far as the comparison. So I'm going to change the statement. I'm going to make it an if statement. And since disregard_MC.isChecked is a Boolean variable, I can treat it as simply true or false conditional. And so if that is true, then I'm going to take ABC and set it equal to ABC dot, and I'll just use toLowerCase, and do the same thing with XYZ. And if they're not checked, then we're going to keep them the same. Now, I mentioned earlier that we might want to do this in our conditional, but these are local variables. I'm not going to reuse them elsewhere, and so it's not going to matter if I'm changing the case structure of these, as long as I'm not later doing something in this particular snippet of code that wants to look at the original values. Let's just test this. So right now the disregard case is unchecked, and I'm saying those are not equal. But if I were to check this, I'm told it's a match. If I uncheck it, they're back to not being equal. So that's how we can build case sensitivity into maybe a search feature of a project we might be working on, and giving the user control of that case sensitivity. If you wanted to explore the ASCII values of characters a little more in depth, you could Google simply ASCII chart and find a ton of choices out there. And in our Canvas course management system, in the modules, if you scroll down to the working with strings, I've included a link here to an ASCII character chart. And sometimes in Canvas it doesn't come up very well, so you can click on this link and there's our ASCII chart. And so before we saw a capital D was a 68 and a lowercase d was 100. By the way, lowercase values are always 32 more than the uppercase. Little tip there to kind of remember. Lowercase is always greater than uppercase.